and I've given you some programs of a sort, just sort of a scorecard of the characters you're going to hear from in this next set. These are excerpted from the Spoon River Anthology by Edgar Masters. Over 35 years ago, Bob and I and our friend Gari on the end did a production similar to this, more of a staged production rather than a reading, and had 3 other good friends in it with us, 2 of whom have left our planet, and 1 is living in another state now. But when Bob thought about what to do to make tonight special, this was an idea he had, and Gari was kind enough to fly up from Indianapolis to join us, and we're lucky enough to have Chris and Erin fill in for some of the missing original cast. And Gari?
Edgar Masters was born in central Illinois in a very small town. His father was a lawyer. He went to college, and his family couldn't afford to send him to college, but it was at a time when you could apprentice at a law firm and become a lawyer. So he passed the bar exam in Illinois and decided he wanted to leave the little town and go to Chicago. And he was a lawyer in Chicago for many years, and he'd started writing poetry when he was in grade school. And he decided he was going to quit being a lawyer and go back to the town where he was born and write poems and expose small town life for what it was. And it was kind of an idyllic place when he was writing. And he wrote the first book of poetry, Spoon River, and it was published in 1914. And he later added some more in 1916. There are a total of 212 characters. And he took license. He would just go to cemeteries and find people's names, and then he'd write stories about them. Well, some of them were a little closer to home, and he became a little bit of an outcast in the town where he lived. So, Spoon River.
Dusty day morning, 3 hours late. Open the curtains, let the rest wait. My mind is running 3,000 miles east. May miss the harvest, but I won't miss the feast. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. Illinois, Illinois, Illinois. South California, your sun is too cold. Looks like your hills have been robbed of their gold. I should have come out when I was first told. This lamb has got to return to the fold. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. Illinois, 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 Illinois. Flat on the prairie, sand and the stone, stretching forever, calling me home. I've got a woman who waits for me there. I need a breath of that sweet country air. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. And it looks like you're gonna have to see me again. And it looks like you're gonna have to see sing again. Illinois, 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 Illinois.
Where are Elmer, Herman, Bert, Tom, and Charlie? The weak of will, the strong of arm, the clown, the boozer, the fighter. All are sleeping on the hill. One passed in a fever. One was burned in a mine. One was killed in a brawl. One died in a jail. One fell from a bridge, toiling for children and wife. All are sleeping on the hill. Where are Ellen, Kate, Mag, Lizzie, and Edith? The tender heart, the simple soul, the loud, the proud, the happy ones. All are sleeping on the hill. One died in shameful childbirth, one of a thwarted love, one at the hands of a brute in a brothel, one of a broken pride in the search for heart's desire. One, after life in faraway London and Paris, was brought to her little space by Ellen and Kate and Mag. All are sleeping on the hill.
Do you know what you'd like for dessert? Louis Vuitton? Awesome. Is he all done with both of these?
Well, it was midnight, and the earth sparkled with new fallen frost. It was moonlight, and not a soul was abroad. Out of the chimney of the courthouse, a gray hound of smoke leapt and chased the northwest wind. Well, I carried a ladder to the landing of the stairs and leaned it against the frame of the trapdoor in the ceiling of the portico. Well, and I crawled under the roof and around the timbers and flung among the seasoned timbers a lighted handful of oil-soaked waste. Then I came down and slunk away. Well, in a little while, the fire bell rang. Clang, 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 and the Spoon River Ladder Company came out with a dozen buckets and began to pour water on the glorious bonfire, growing hotter, higher, and brighter, till the walls fell in, and the limestone columns where Lincoln stood crashed like trees when the woodsman fells them. And when I came back from Joliet, there was a new courthouse with a dome, for I was punished, like all, who destroy the past for the sake of the future.
If you in the village think that my work was a good one, who closed the saloons and stopped all playing of cards, and hailed old Daisy Frazier before Justice Arnott, in many a crusade to purge the people of sin, why do you let the milliner's daughter, Dora, and the worthless son of Benjamin Pantier nightly make my grave their unholy pillow?
Herbert broke our engagement of 8 years when Annabelle came back to the village from the seminary. Ah, me. If I had let my love for him alone, it might have grown into a beautiful sorrow. Who knows? Filling my life with healing fragrance. But I tortured it. I poisoned it. I blinded its eyes. And it became hate. Deadly ivy instead of clematis. And my soul fell from its support, its tendrils tangled in decay. Do not let your will play gardener to your soul unless you're sure it is wiser than your soul's nature.
Out of the cell and into this darkened space, the end at 25. My tongue could not speak what stirred within me. And the village thought me a fool. Yet at the start, there was a clear vision, a high and urgent purpose in my soul, which drove me on to trying to memorize the Encyclopedia Britannica.
I was only 8 years old. And before I grew up and knew what it meant, I had no words for it except that I was frightened. And I told my mother. And that my father got a pistol and would have killed Charlie, who was a big boy, 15 years old, except for his mother. Nevertheless, the story clung to me. But the man who married me, a widower of 35, was a newcomer. I never heard it till 2 years after we were married. Then he considered himself cheated, and the village agreed that I was not really a virgin. Well, he deserted me, and I died the following winter.
She loved me. Oh, how she loved me. I never had a chance to escape from the day she first saw me. But then, after we were married, I thought she might prove her mortality and let me out, or she might divorce me. But few die and none resign. Then I ran away and was gone a year on a lark. And she never complained. She said all would be well, and I'd return. And I did return. I told her that while taking a row in a boat, I had been captured near Van Buren Street by pirates on Lake Michigan. Kept in chains, so I could not ride her. She cried and kissed me and said it was cruel and outrageous and inhuman. Well, I then concluded our marriage was a divine dispensation and could not be dissolved except by death. I was right.
He ran away and was gone for a year. And when he got home, he told me this silly story of being kidnapped by pirates on Lake Michigan and held in chains so he could not write me. I pretended to believe him, but all the while I knew what he was doing. And then he met the milliner, Mrs. Williams, now and then when she went into the city to buy goods, as she said. But a promise is a promise, and a marriage is a marriage. And out of respect for my own character, I refuse to be drawn into a divorce by the scheme of a man who'd merely grown tired of his marital vow and duty.
I belonged to the church and to the party of prohibition. And the villagers thought I died of eating a watermelon. In truth, I had cirrhosis of the liver. For every noon for 30 years, I'd slip behind the partition, and in Trainer's drugstore, I poured a generous drink from the bottle marked Spiritus Frumenti. Rye whiskey, I cry. Well, if I don't get rye whiskey, I surely will die. Well, if the ocean was whiskey and I was a duck, dive to the bottom, never come up. Rye whiskey, I cry. If I don't get rye whiskey, I surely will die. Check it diamonds, I know you of old. Rob my pork pockets of silver and gold. Rye whiskey, I cry.
Beefsteak when I'm hungry, red liquor when I'm dry, greenbacks when I'm hard up, religion when I die. Rye whiskey, rye whiskey, rye whiskey, I cry.
Here we go.
If I don't get rye whiskey, I surely will die.
They say I drink whiskey, my money's my own. Them that don't like me can leave me alone. Rye whiskey, rye whiskey, rye whiskey, I cry. If I don't get rye whiskey, I surely will die.
Sweet milk when I'm hungry, rye whiskey when I'm dry. Well, if a tree don't fall on me, I'll live till I die. Rye whiskey, rye whiskey, rye whiskey, I cry. Well, if I don't get rye whiskey, I surely will die. Rye whiskey, rye whiskey, rye whiskey, I cry. Well, if I don't get rye whiskey, I surely will die.
I could have been as great as George Eliot. For look at the photograph of me made by Pennywit. Chin resting on hand, eyes deep set, gray too and far-reaching. But there was the old problem. Should it be celibacy, matrimony, or unchastity? Then John Slack, the rich druggist, wooed me, luring me with promise of leisure for my novel, and I married him, giving birth to 8 children and had no time to write. It was all over for me anyway when I ran the needle in my hand while washing the baby's things and died from lockjaw, an ironical death. Hear me, ambitious souls, sex is the curse of life.
I was a peasant girl from Germany, blue-eyed, rosy, happy and strong. And the first place I worked was at Thomas Green's. On a summer's day, while she was away, he stole into the kitchen and took me right in his arms and kissed me on my throat. I, turning my head. Then neither of us seemed to know what happened. And I cried for what would become of me. And cried as my secret began to show. One day Mrs. Green came to me and said she understood and would make no trouble for me, and being childless would adopt it. He had given her a farm to be still. And all went well, and the child was born. They were so kind to me. Later I married Gus Wertmann, and years passed. But at political rallies, when sitters-by thought I was crying at the eloquence of Hamilton Green, that was not it. No, I wanted to say, that's my son. That's my son.
I was the only child of Francis Harris of Virginia and Thomas Green of Kentucky. A valiant and honorable blood both. To them I owe all that I became. Judge, member of Congress, leader in the state. From my mother I inherited vivacity, fancy, language. From my father, will, judgment, logic. All honor to them for what service I was to the people.
When my mustache curled and my hair was black, and I wore tight trousers and a diamond stud. I was an excellent knave of hearts and took many a trick. But when the gray hairs began to appear, lo, a new generation of girls laughed at me, not fearing me, and I had no more exciting adventures wherein I was all but shot for a heartless devil. But only drabby affairs warmed over affairs of other days and other men. Time went on till I lived at Mayor's Restaurant, partaking of short orders of gray, untidy, toothless, discarded rural Don Juan. There is a mighty shade here who sings of one named Beatrice, and I see now that the force that made him great drove me to the dregs of life.
How'd you like it? Good. You like that? Awesome. Do you need another glass of wine? Oh.
Love is handsome, love is fine, bright as a jewel. When first it's new, but love grows old and waxes cold and fades away like the morning dew. Water is wide, I can't control, and neither have I the wings to fly. Build me a boat that can carry two, and from shall row my love and pride.
Silent before the jury, when the judge asked if I had aught to say against the verdict, just nodding my head. What could I say to people who thought that a woman of 35 was guilty when her lover of 19 killed her husband, even though she said to him over and over again, "Elmer, go away. Go far away. I have maddened your brain with the gift of my body, and you will do some terrible thing." And just as I thought, he murdered my husband, with which I had nothing to do before God. Silent for 30 years in prison. And the iron gates at Joliet swung. And the gray and silent trustees carried me out in a coffin.
What but the love of God could have softened and made forgiven the people of Spoon River? toward me who wronged the bed of Thomas Merritt, and murdered him beside. Oh, loving hearts that took me in when I returned from 14 years in prison. Oh, helping hands that in the church received me and heard with tears my penitent confession, who took the sacrament of bread and wine. Repent, ye living ones, and rest with Jesus.
Road slave, selling shoes and gingham, flour and bacon, overalls, clothing, all day long. 14 hours a day for 313 days for more than 20 years. Saying yes, and yes, sir, and thank you 1,000 times a day, and all for $50 a month. Living in this stinking room in the Rat Trap commercial, and compelled to go to Sunday school and listen to the Reverend Admiral Pete 104 times a year for more than an hour at a time. Because Thomas Rhodes ran the church, as well as the store and the bank. So while I was tying my necktie that morning, I suddenly saw myself in the glass, my hair all gray, my face like a sodden pie. So I cursed you damn old thing, cowardly dog, you rotten pauper, you road slave. Until Roger Bauman thought I was having a fight with someone and looked through the transom just in time to see me fall on the floor in a heap, a broken vein in my neck.
I was born in Weimar of a mother who was French and a German father, a most learned professor. Orphaned at 14 years, became a dancer known as Russian Sonia, all up and down the boulevards of Paris. Mistress bedtimes of sundry dykes and counts, later of poor artists and poets. At 40 years passé, I sought New York and met old Patrick Hammer on the boat. Red-faced and hale, he turned his 60th year, returning after sold a shipload of cattle in the German city Hamburg. He brought me to Spoon River, where we lived here for 20 years. They thought that we were married. This oak tree near me is the favorite home of blue jays chattering all the day. And why not? For my very dust is laughing, for thinking of this humorous scene called life.
I went to the dances at Chandlerville and played Snap Out at Winchester. One time we changed partners driving home in the moonlight of middle June. And then I found Davies. We were married and lived together for 70 years, enjoying, working, raising the 12 children, 8 of whom we lost ere I had reached the age of 60. I spun, I wove, I kept the house, I nursed the sick, I made the garden, and for holiday rambled the green fields where sang the larks. And by Spoon River gathering many a shell and many a flower and medicinal weed, shouting to the wooded hills, singing to the green valleys. At 96, I had lived enough, that is all, and passed to a sweet repose. What is this I hear of sorrow and weariness, anger, discontent, and drooping hopes? Degenerate sons and daughters, life is too strong for you. It takes life to love life.
When this life is over, I'll fly away to a land on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When this shadow of this life is gone, I'll fly away. Like the bird from these prison walls, I'll fly. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Oh, how glad and happy when we meet. I'll fly away. No more cold iron shackles on my feet. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a place where the joys will never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. I'll fly away. I'll fly away.
I was the first fruits of the Battle of Missionary Ridge when I felt the bullet enter my heart. I wished I'd stayed home and gone to jail for stealing the hogs at Curl Trinnery instead of running away and joining the army. Rather 1,000 times the county jail than to lie under this marble figure with wings and this granite pedestal bearing the words Pro Patria. What do they mean, anyway?
Nolt Holheimer ran away to the war the day before Curl Trinnery swore out a warrant through Justice Arnett for stealing hogs. But that's not the reason he turned us over. He caught me running with Lucius Atherton. We quarreled, and I told him never to cross my path again. Then he stole the hogs and went to the war. Behind every soldier is a woman.
Hallelujah, His truth is marching on.
And the earth keeps some vibration going there in your heart. That is you. And if the people find you can fiddle, why, fiddle you must for all your life. What do you see? A harvest of clover or a meadow to walk through to the river? The wind's in the corn. You rub your hands for beeves hereafter ready for market. Or else you hear the rustle of skirts like the girls dancing at Little Grove. To Cooney Potter, pillar of dust or whirling leaves meant ruinous drought. To me, they looked like redhead Sammy snipping it off to tour Lord. How could I till my 40 acres, not to speak of getting more, with a medley of horns, bassoons, piccolos stirred in my brain by cows and robins and the creak of a windmill? Only these? I never started to plow in my life that someone didn't stop in the road and take me away to a dance or a picnic. I ended up with 40 acres and I ended up with a broken fiddle, broken laugh, 1,000 memories, and not a single regret. My life goes on in endless song, up of earth's lamentation. My life goes on in endless song to hail a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the death knell ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing?
Reverend Wiley advised me not to divorce him for the sake of the children. And Judge Summers advised him the same. But 2 of the children thought I was right, and 2 of the children thought he was right. And those who sided with him blamed me, and those who sided with me blamed him. And all were torn with the grief of judging, and grieved for the one they thought was right. They were sorrowful in soul, because they could not love equally him and me. Now every gardener knows that seeds planted in cellars or under rocks grow into plants that are yellow and twisted and weak. And what mother would let her child suck diseased milk from her breast? Yet preachers and judges decide the raising of souls where there is no sunlight, only twilight. And there is no warmth, but only cold and damp. Preachers and judges.
My wife lost her health and dwindled till she weighed scarce 90 pounds. Then that woman whom the men styled Cleopatra came along, and we married ones all broke our vows, myself among the rest. Years passed, and one by one death claimed them all in some hideous form. I was borne along by dreams of God's particular grace for me, and I began to write reams on reams of the second coming of Christ. Then Christ came to me and said, "Go to the church, stand before the congregation, and confess your sin." Just as I stood up and began to speak, I saw my little girl who was sitting in the front seat. My little girl was born blind. After that, all was blackness.
Here lies the body of Lois Spears, born Lois Fluke, daughter of Willard Fluke, wife of Cyrus Spears, mother of Myrtle and Virgil Spears, children with clear eyes and sound limbs. I was born blind. I was the happiest of women's wife, mother, and housekeeper, caring for my loved ones and making my home a place of order and bounteous hospitality. For I went about the rooms and about the garden with an instinct as sure as light, as though there were eyes in my fingertips. Glory to God in the highest. Amazing grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. Her precious dear, that grace appeared the hour I first believed. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see.
I wrote him a letter asking him for old time's sake to discharge my sick boy from the army. But maybe he couldn't read it. Then I went to town and got James Garber, who wrote beautifully, to write him a letter. But maybe that was lost in the mails. So I traveled all the way to Washington. I was more than an hour finding the White House. And when I found it, they turned me away, hiding their smiles. Then I thought, oh well, he ain't the same as when I boarded him, and he and my husband worked together, and all of us called him Abe there in Menard. As a last attempt, I turned to a guard and said, please say it's old Aunt Hannah Armstrong from Illinois, come to see him about her sick boy in the army. Well, just in a moment, they let me in. And when he saw me, he dropped his business as president and broke in a laugh and wrote in his own hand Doug's discharge, talking the while of the early days and telling stories.
I was Willie Metcalf. They used to call me Dr. Myers because they said I looked like him. He was my father, according to Jack McGuire. I lived in the livery stable, sleeping on the floor, side by side with Roger Bauman's bulldog, or sometimes in a stall. I could crawl between the legs of the wildest horses without getting kicked. We knew each other. On spring days, I tramped through the country to get the feeling, which I sometimes lost, that I was not separate thing from the earth. And I used to lose myself, as in sleep. I lying with eyes half open in the woods. Sometimes I talked to the animals, even toads and snakes. Anything that had an eye to look into. Once I saw a stone in the sunshine trying to turn into jelly. In April days in the cemetery, the dead people gathered all about me and grew still like a congregation in silent prayer. I never knew whether I was part of the earth with flowers growing in me or whether I walked. Now I know.
All of the riverboat gamblers are losing losing their shirts. And all the brave Union soldier boys sleep in the dirt. But you know and I know there never was reason to hurt. When all of our lives were entwined to begin with, here in Spoon River. Dance, Mary Perkins, I like you right well. The Union's preserved, if you listen, you'll hear all the bells. There must be a heaven, Lord knows I've seen mostly hell. My rig is outside, let us ride through the morning here in Spoon River.
Good friends, let's to the fields. I have a fever. After a little walk and by your pardon, I think I'll sleep. There is nothing sweeter, no fate more blessed than to sleep. Here, world, I pass you as an orange to a child. I can no more with you. Do what you will.
All of the riverboat gamblers are losing their shirts. And all of the brave Union soldier boys sleep in the dirt. But you know and I know there never was reason to hurt. When all of our lives were entwined to begin with, here in Spoon River. But you know and I know there never was reason to hurt. When all of our lives were entwined to begin with, here in Spoon River.
Thank you. Anybody who had a pink program, come and see me because that'll get you a free drink. Yeah, it'd be pink.
That's purple.